of those oil supplies, it is a casus belli for the United States. We will go to war. Now, he was speaking of a hostile power outside the Middle East doing that. But this was equally true of a hostile power within the Middle East, which would try to gain hegemony over those oil supplies to use it as leverage against the United States and its allies. For example, that was the problem with Saddam Hussein. With his delusional Nebuchadnezzar dreams of greater Iraq, his invasions of Iran, his invasions of Kuwait, yes, his weapons of mass destruction program, which he did have, were all threatening this key part of American foreign policy. So when he went into when he went into Kuwait and then made several military feints into Saudi Arabia, and the King of Saudi Arabia contacted the United States and said, help! Whether indeed Saddam Hussein intended an extended military operation against the Saudis, the political lesson of his incursions were very clear. Your orders will now come from Baghdad, not the United States. That was something the United States could not allow him to get away with, and thus we had the first Gulf War. Now, that Gulf War from 1991 never ended. 11 years later, that war continued because George Bush Sr. decided to halt the coalition's military advances and to let the Iraqi Republican Guard escape intact. Thus, 11 years later, Saddam Hussein was still out of compliance with the terms of the ceasefire. And the United States and its allies had to fly to protect the no-fly zones in northern Iraq and southern Iraq. Our planes were being fired upon during that period of more than a decade on a weekly basis. How was that war going to come to an end? Because it wasn't successfully terminated in 91, Bush Jr. decided on Operation Iraqi Freedom, which, in my estimation, was a necessary war. It wasn't an optional war, as it is called today. I was actually there in the spring of 2003 in Baghdad, living in Saddam Hussein's Republican palace. I can't tell you how bizarre that was. By the way, the Arabic inscription on the side of the entrance of the palace, which had been heavily damaged in 1991, Saddam Hussein not only had repaired the palace, but trebled it in size. And he put in this inscription that this was done in celebration of the great Iraqi victory over the United States in 1991. And indeed, that wasn't delusional thinking. 11 years later, there he still was in defiance of the ceasefire resolutions. I don't want to spend all this time on what turned out to be a giant misadventure. We went there to liberate a country and then mistakenly decided to occupy it with the results that we are all well aware of. Now, part of the idea of going into Iraq, based once again upon this fundamental perspective that if these people are freed, they will assume the blessings of self-government, that we would give the Iraqi people this opportunity. If Iraq could be molded or refashioned in this way, it is the central country in the Middle East, and its influence would then reverberate throughout the area. That was part of the thinking. Now, when the Arab Spring broke forth in 2011, in a way this seemed to confirm the thesis. First starting in Tunisia, which by the way today held its first direct presidential election, and then Egypt, huge, massive crowds in Tahrir Square calling for the end of the Mubarak military regime. Who could not have wished these people well? Who could not have hoped for them that finally they would overcome these military police state autocracies and assume the blessings of self-liberty? Did any of you think that was going to happen? No? Not one nod? Yes? None of you did. Well, this is how good the Woodward Institute is, because you were so well prepared by reality. There wasn't a chance that that was going to happen. None whatsoever. And anyone who understands the Islamic culture would have known that. There were only 3 potential beneficiaries of the so-called Arab Spring. One, the royal or semi-royal authoritative regimes supported by military and mukhabarat secret police. Of course, that's the regime that already was in Egypt. The other potential beneficiary was radical Islam in the form of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Ikhwan, which was the single most highly organized social, political, religious force in Egypt and in other parts of the Middle East, hard at work for more than 80 years, developing a Leninist cadre to someday, to first of all, Islamicize those societies from the ground up, infiltrate the organs of authority, and prepare to take over and create their own one-party state. They had worked long and hard for this opportunity. They were a potential beneficiary of the Arab Spring. The third potential beneficiary were the Arab tribes. They were the only other organized force in the Middle East which could take advantage of this situation. So you had tribal organizations, you had Islamist organizations, and you had the authoritarian military secret police organizations. There was no organized, institutional, democratic source of opposition that was in any condition to take advantage of this. Not a chance. And you would say, well, that's because they were suppressed all those years by Mubarak and by the other autocrats in the Middle East. And to a certain extent, that of course is true. But there's a deeper, deeper, deeper problem here that has to be faced. One of which I think you're probably aware, because none of you shook your head yes when you thought that the Arab Spring would turn out well. And that is that the fundamental philosophical presuppositions for democratic constitutional rule do not exist in Islam. And certainly not within what we call Islamism, that is radical political Islam. For instance, let us ask ourselves, in Egypt, the largest Arab nation, how many people there do you suppose would agree with the principle that all people are created equal? The fundamental principle of democratic constitutional rule. What percentage of the population do you think would sign up to that? Ah, women. We have a little problem there, don't we? In Islam, and I'm speaking doctrinally now, in Sharia law, women are not equal to men. Do you think Coptic Christians are equal to Muslims? No. Unbelievers or people of the book or infidels are not equal to Muslims. How about Muslims and Jews? Oh, I don't think so. So that fundamental presupposition for democratic constitutional order is not there. I have a Swiss acquaintance who published a book on constitutional thought in the Islamic world, and he examined the entire range of thinking on this subject. That is, from the Salafist fundamentalist, from the Islamist, to the more orthodox Muslims, to what we would consider liberal Muslims, who can use the same language as we, and it sounds very much like they're on board until you take a little closer look underneath. And he concluded that none of them, across the range of opinion, in theological or more importantly in jurisprudential thinking, that there was any basis for accepting these fundamental premises for constitutional rule. Now, so how have we behaved throughout this? This is an extremely interesting question. As it seems, we discovered, or I thought we had discovered, that the really serious problems in the Middle East are indigenous. They are not the cause of imperialism. However, I don't think this thought occurred to President Obama. He continued this narrative that the peoples of the Middle East are not enjoying the blessings of liberty and self-government because of imperialism, but now it's not because of Ottoman imperialism or British-French imperialism, it's because of, guess what? American imperialism. We are the problems. We are the source of the problems in the Middle East, and therefore what is the solution to those problems? American withdrawal. And that, of course, is exactly the scenario that he has pursued with these interesting results. George W. Bush, of course, was despised by large swaths of the population in the Middle East. Though they do respect force, and they knew he was a strong man. Now, President Obama, after the overthrow of Mubarak in Egypt, came out in strong support of the Muslim Brotherhood. If you recall, James Clapper, the head of his intelligence, made a statement that the Muslim Brotherhood is a secular organization. He's still in his job. This is the Muslim Brotherhood, as you probably know, was founded in 1928, 4 years after the abolition of the Caliphate, with the express purpose of restoring the Caliphate and imposing Sharia law. And over their 85, 86 years now, they have been faithful to those purposes and those principles, and that you could have a leader in the United States telling us that it's a secular organization is simply beyond my imagination. Of course, well, because they were the single most organized force aside from the government, which fell, because, by the way, of the Egyptian military. The Arab Spring is a phenomenon of the Egyptian military. Mubarak wanted to pass on his regime to his son. They did not want that to happen. The Egyptian military has in the background run Egypt since 1956. And so they allowed those forces to erupt to the surface and remove Mubarak. The Obama administration then expressed its support for President Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood. When Mubarak was still in power, Obama went to Cairo to make his speech there, for his famous speech there, and he had in the first row Muslim Brotherhood members sitting. An express snub against the Mubarak regime. Mubarak, of course, would not come to the talk precisely because of the Obama administration's insistence that the Brotherhood people be there. Now, when the consolidation and monopolization of power proceeded in Egypt after the election of Morsi, and he was seizing all the levers of power, that support from Obama continued, and it began alienating the Egyptian people. Then, of course, a year after being in office, the largest demonstrations in Egyptian history, and possibly the largest demonstrations in history, took place in Egypt and Cairo and the other cities to force Morsi out of office, which succeeded, thanks to the Egyptian military once again. The Obama administration denounced this, but he did nothing to reverse it. So now we have the curious situation in which this administration has alienated absolutely everyone in the Middle East. He has alienated the Ikhwan because they blame him for not coming to their rescue, and he is vilified by all the other Muslims who don't want to live in a Ikhwan Sharia state for his support of them. So there's really basically nothing left there. You know, I want to tell you one little story, by the way. And have I spoken too long? How hungry are you? Someone will... I'm on the board of an organization